Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Matthias' power was indeed fathomless. A level 14 magic shooter could not put up any resistance when facing him. He could only last for less than 8 minutes before being blasted away by an air bomb severely. In an instant, there was blood splattering everywhere. On the other hand, most of the several thousands of mages at the spectators' seats were used to seeing blood. They could not help but shake their heads. Matthias' personality had issues. Once or twice could be written off as an accident, but 3 times in a row, it could be safely said that Matthias did it intentionally. He was utterly trying to injure his opponents for no rhyme or reason. It was purely out of interest, or maybe that was what he wanted to do. Even Herza frowned. This Matthias was really going overboard. Even if he won the final victory, he would definitely not be suitable to control a new guild of magic. This point had to be written down in the report. As for Lin Li's match afterward, it was just a walkover. Macklin was not spouting nonsense. That magic shooter at the peak of level 13 was a spent bullet. When he just walked into the Aurora Square, Lin Li could already sense that this person's magical wave was too weak. It did not resemble that of a level 13 magic shooter. Instead, it was like that of a mage apprentice that could not even wear a robe. Both of them were very clear on what the outcome was going to be. When he walked up to the Aurora Square with a pale face, Gordon spoke softly, "Mage Felix, please have mercy." "Mage Gordon, you're too kind," Lin Li smiled. He waved the ether staff in his hands and released an elemental shield instantly. "Thanks." This was a battle full of tacit understanding. Lin Li used the elemental shield to tell the opponent that he would not do anything out of bounds, and for the appreciative Gordon, he did not try to fight desperately. The whole process seemed to have been planned beforehand. Gordon attacked continuously with his weak strength once he came up, whereas Lin Li only blocked with the elemental shield and occasionally countered with wind blade all the way till the 10th minute mark. Only then did Lin Li accidentally release a chilling touch and thus successfully conclude this match. "This young man is not bad," Herza, who sat in the VIP seat, satisfyingly nodded his head. With his judgment after devoting to magic for tens of years, how could he be deceived by these two's acting? From the point when the Gerosis mage raised his elemental shield, he had already known that this match was fixed. Otherwise, with his powers, why would he need to use the elemental shield? To put it bluntly, he would not even need to use any magic to go against the spent bullet Gordon. Just by casually smacking him with the magic staff, he would also beat him to death. But this is good. Establishing a new guild in the Breezy Plains did not only require a powerful president. That place was really chaotic, for all sorts of forces there were more complicated than those in Alana by 100 times. To create a foothold there was not an easy task. Other than requiring absolute power to intimidate those that harbored ill intentions, it also needed methods that could pacify and dissolve conflict. An immense strength was important, but tactful methods were also necessary. Back then, while deciding this issue, Herza had already consulted one of the arbitrators, Anthony. What sort of person would be the most suitable to command this new guild of magic? Herza remembers that Anthony's answer was, "The humbler, the better." Without a doubt, that Gerosis mage down there is definitely a humble person. He did a favor at little cost and still managed to sell it off so sincerely. Genius. What a genius. Furthermore, Felix's relationship with Hoffman seemed to be rather good. If he could command the new guild of magic, then there would not be many issues with the Glitter Gold trade union. Monetary support could even be given if need be. This was definitely the most ideal situation for a guild of magic that had just been established. Of course, they would have to wait for the tournament results before they could see how the story was going to unfold. After all, the rules have already been set in place. Even if they wanted to change them, they could not do so too drastically. Within half an hour, 2 of the battles of the final 3 had already concluded. The only pair remaining was Mason and Gryffindor. Fought. "Why am I so unlucky?" Mason stood at the Aurora Square, frowning. Lin Li scratched his head, and did not know what to say. Even an idiot knew that Mason fighting against Gryffindor was like smashing an egg on a rock. There was not a single chance of victory. Logically speaking, he should be advising Mason to be more realistic and not lose too badly. But how could he say something like that? Hence, Lin Li shook his head and sighed without saying anything. I know you are trying to advise me to surrender lest I lose too badly. However, Mason already knew what he was thinking about even if he did not say it. He glanced at Lin Li gloomily, and started mumbling, I do feel like surrendering, but I'm just worried Gryffindor would not accept it. Ah, if I die, then so be it. If I can do it, I will surrender. I don't believe that Gryffindor would still continue beating me up if I surrender. Mason spoke, full of valor. He stuck out his chest and walked onto the Aurora Square, leaving Lin Li staring in disbelief. Gryffindor stood at the center of the Aurora Square and stared straight at his opponent. Gryffindor remembered that this guy was Oren's roommate, called Mason or Mark. That day at the spell testing hall, it was this guy that ruined everything. If he had not pulled Oren away, Oren would have died to him. Yet now, Oren could actually still watch the competition. Oh yes, there's still fella called Felix. This country bumpkin from Gerosis, he did not even have any regard for Gryffindor. Gryffindor had heard that the main reason why Oren could still be standing here was mostly because of him. Just thinking about it made Gryffindor want to kill the both of them. Fuck. You dare to save someone I, Gryffindor, want to kill? Are you stealing your heart and going against me? Fine, since you guys do not know how to appreciate favors, then don't blame me, Gryffindor, for being merciless. That Felix definitely cannot be forgiven, but before that, time to let them see how I'm going to destroy their roommate. Gryffindor started sneering when he saw Mason walking up to the Aurora Square. Do you think you will be completely safe since Aldwin inscribed ManhwaRecap on you? What a joke, for ManhwaRecap of the mastery level would only decrease the damage from spells. In front of a true archmage, what could ManhwaRecap do? Even Matthias, that trash, knows how to make use of openings. What about me? Just watch, later I will definitely let you feel all sorts of pain and then slowly drain out every bit of blood before I deal with that country bumpkin. What are you doing? Mason stood on the Aurora Square and looked at Gryffindor. He could not help but feel a lack of self-confidence. You will know in a bit. Gryffindor had a grin at the corner of his mouth. When he stared at Mason, it was like a big gray wolf staring at a white rabbit. Mason swallowed his saliva with difficulty. Let me warn you, don't try anything crazy. Gryffindor glanced at Mason with disdain. He did not say anything else, and stood there quietly, waiting for the judges to announce the commencement of the match. Looks like both of them are ready. Let the match begin. As the judge said, begin, Gryffindor suddenly moved. There was only a steady recitation of spells, which was followed closely by a mental control. Fuck, this little bastard. Macklin stood at the side of Aurora Square and harshly cursed. This little bastard really was Rosen's disciple. It could be seen just with a single mental control. This little bastard's was exactly the same as his teacher's. Gryffindor definitely saw through his opponent. Mason, who had just entered battle stance, had to be harboring fear towards him. As for mental control, this spell excelled in such situations the most. Once there was fear within one's mind, it would be hard to maintain a calm and composed attitude. Once the mental control was able to find an opening, there would no need to continue the battle. How could a controlled bum be of any threat to the one controlling him? Sure enough, it did not exceed Macklin's expectations. Gryffindor released mental control and Mason's expression immediately froze. He consecutively released 3 flaming storms, and the whole Aurora Square had instantly been set off in a dazzling flare. It was a pity that these 3 flaming storms' target was not his opponent, but the stone slabs covering the Aurora Square. The flare was scattering, and tiny rocks were flying around. The 2 judges were unprepared and struck by a few pebbles, because they were too close. The debris was not lethal, but it stung when it struck the human body. The duration of the mental control was usually more than 5 seconds, plus the current Gryffindor was an archmage. The difference in power was too great, thus the duration of Mason being controlled was much longer. He barely managed to break free from it and regained control over his mental strength. Fuck, this guy really is strong. Mason released 3 flaming storms simultaneously, and his mana started to lose support. He barely managed to escape from the mental control, and hurriedly took a few steps back while trying to raise up the elemental shield. Who knew that everything was already within Gryffindor's calculations? Before Mason had raised his elemental shield, Gryffindor had already released a mana retroaction. In an instant, it cut off the mana channel that Mason had just constructed. For Mason, this was a tragedy. He barely managed to make it through the duration of the mental control. He had just thought of raising an elemental shield to protect himself, but he did not think that Gryffindor would be so shrewd and prepared for his execution timing. With this release of mental control, it was like a leg was stepping on Mason's throat. He instantly lost the ability to speak. What to do now? The difference in power was already far apart, and now he was being pressured so badly. No matter how optimistic Mason's character was, he could not help but start panicking now. It would be more troublesome once he panicked. Before Mason could think of a way, Gryffindor released another mental control. What the hell? Mason immediately felt that everything in front of him was black. It was not even a minute since he was last controlled, and now he lost control over his mental strength again. After that, he felt that the mana in his body had furiously surged out, and another 3 flaming storms bombarded the Aurora Square. This time, Mason thought he really was going to die. Even a mage apprentice knew that Flaming Storm was famous for expending mana. He was just a level 11 magic shooter and not Felix, that monster with infinite mana. How could he have so much mana to blast the surface? With a series of flaming storms, Mason could clearly feel that the mana within his body was showing signs of exhaustion. It's over, just a short minute of battle, and he had been mind-controlled twice in a row already. This was hopeless enough in itself, but Gryffindor, that biatch, was not in a rush to finish off Mason. He used this despicable method to deplete Mason's mana. At this point, even an idiot would know that this biatch Gryffindor had to have some sinister plan lying in wait for him. It was not that Mason did not want to surrender. After all, the difference in powers was too large. Even if he were to surrender, it would not be embarrassing, but Gryffindor, this biatch, did not give him a single chance to surrender. The continuous magic suppression caused Mason not to be able to open his mouth, what more to tell the 2 judges that he wanted to surrender. When the 4th flaming storm was released, Mason had completely lost all hope. The last strand of mana had been utterly expended, and the only thing he could rely on now was that negligible natural recovery. Based on his little bit of mental strength, the bit of mana recovered was not enough for an elemental shield, what more to try and turn the situation around. Don't panic, it has only just begun. When both of their shoulders brushed past each other, Gryffindor's voice was like a venomous snake slithering into Mason's ear. Looking at Mason's pale face, Gryffindor's heart was filled with the delight of revenge. This was the result he'd wanted. Depleting Mason's strength, crushing all of his confidence, and then letting him die from the hopelessness of endless pain. All of this was originally prepared for Orin, but he had not imagined that this fella called Mason would ruin everything in the spell testing hall the other day. Then, naturally, all of this could be placed on Mason. After all, regardless if you are called Mason or Mark, since you have spoilt my, Gryffindor's, plans, then you must be ready for my revenge. After 2 consecutive mind controls, Gryffindor had completely dominated the match. The current Mason had already expended his last bit of mana. He could but watch on as Gryffindor recited the incantations with a hideous smile. This is bad. Lin Li stood far away at the side of the Aurora Square, and he was really anxious. When the first mind control was released, Lin Li already knew what Gryffindor was planning. At that point, he really felt like rushing onto the Aurora Square to remind Mason, hurry and surrender, don't hold on anymore. Unfortunately, when the match had already progressed to this point, it was already too late for him to remind him. Gryffindor used mind control another 2 times to deplete Mason's mana. After that, it would just be an outright stomping. Lin Li could only hope that Mason could find a chance in this dire situation to catch a breather even if he couldn't end the match. Otherwise, if this continued, Mason would be driven mad by Gryffindor even if he did not die. But with Mason's strength, how could it be easy to find a chance in front of Gryffindor? Gryffindor had just finished speaking, and the magic staff in his hand shook. After that, a power of repulse was released. This power of repulse could only be described as sinister. With Gryffindor's intentional control, the elemental sequencing of the power of repulse showed a minor disparity, which had changed its attack to start from the top and end at the bottom. It smashed Mason in a constricting manner. That was right, it indeed was smash. In that instant, Mason felt like he had been crushed by a giant rock falling from the sky. Instantly, he felt everything in front of him turned black, and his mind was blank. His eyes, nose, and ears had a trace of warm liquid flowing out. How does it feel? After the release of power of repulse, Gryffindor was not in a rush to attack, but moved towards Mason with a face full of smiles. Gry. Gryffindor, you are too overboard. Mason struggled to open his eyes, and felt that his surroundings were unusually blurry. Be it Gryffindor in front of him, or the judges and the audience far away, they all seemed to be duplicated. Looking at the blurry silhouette wavering in front him, Mason weakly raised his hands to rub his eyes, but he realized that when his hands had just touched it, his hands were covered in blood. Overboard? Ha ha ha. Mage Mason, you really are interesting. Didn't I tell you just now that this was merely the beginning? There are still more interesting things waiting for you. Enjoy. Gryffindor, I warn you, my uncle is not someone to be provoked. If you really injure me, my uncle will definitely not forgive you, Mason spoke in a breathless manner. He desperately invoked his mental strength, trying to recover enough mana during this limited time. In order to buy more time, he even spouted nonsense in order to make Gryffindor continue mocking him and not use another spell to once again sink him into a desperate situation. Haha, your uncle? You mean Anio, that trash? Stop joking around, idiot. In terms of position, I am also a steward of the guild. In terms of identity, I am Leader Rosen's disciple. Even if I were to kill you, what can that idiotic uncle of yours do to me, not to mention just injuring you? If you don't believe me, you can try it. Is it? I've said it before, if you don't believe me, you can try. Okay, I'll admit that you are right, but Mage Gryffindor, I really don't understand. This is just a competition, why are you so brutal? Don't tell me that you've used the mental control to sap my mana just so that you could chat with me. As for this question, Gryffindor's face was filled with a complacent smile. It seemed like he really was highly conceited. It was just that when he was halfway through speaking, Gryffindor's expression suddenly changed, and he released an air bomb. Ask Orin yourself once you are dead. This air bomb exploded right on Mason's chest. Be it the power or the damage, it had far surpassed the prior power of repulse. Instantly, Mason let out a cry and there was blood spewing. When the dust had finally settled, Mason's chest was a bloody mess. Poor idiot, you really think you can those little tricks and hide them from me? Trying to buy yourself more time to recover mana with those few stupid sentences. I really don't know if you are too stupid or too naive. Gryffindor shot another air bomb, severely injuring Mason. His face was filled with a sarcastic smile. No choice. The difference in strength was too large. With Gryffindor's acute archmage senses, he did not have to observe much before he easily grasped Mason's mana flow. When Mason first opened his mouth and spoke, he already guessed the opponent's plans. It was just that Gryffindor was not in a hurry. He really enjoyed such cat and mouse games. He waited until the opponent had finally recovered enough mana before using another air bomb to sink the opponent into despair again. A cat catching a mouse was like this. Give the mouse hope time and time again, before making it feel hopeless again. F***CK. When the air bomb blasted his chest, Mason felt like his whole body had been ripped apart. The stinging pain spread from his chest continuously. The pain from that bloody pile of mess was worse than dying. This time, Mason really gave up. Gryffindor's schemes had far surpassed Mason's imagination. He had used all sorts of methods, and he even acted like a clown, but the result was that he could not even buy any time to regain his mana. All of his efforts had only gotten him one air bomb in exchange. "How's it, Mage Mason? Are you still able to stand up? The game has only just begun, I don't want it to end so quickly." Gryffindor started chanting again, and an electric arc appeared from his palm instantly. He was playing with the electric arc in hands, making it form different shapes, and then he slowly walked towards the side of the square. "It's over, it's really over this time." Mason lay down and his heart slowly sank. While being stupefied and confused, Mason seemed to have heard someone calling his name. At the beginning, Mason thought he was hallucinating, but he quickly realized that this voice was getting clearer and clearer. Upon listening carefully, this seemed to be Felic's voice. Is it really Felic? Mason endured the shredding pain and twisted his neck. He immediately found out that Felic was cupping his hands around his mouth and shouting Mason's name from somewhere not too far. It was as if he was trying to tell Mason something. This sudden realization immediately made the deflated Mason regain some hope. Yes, Felic has always been capable of doing something. He must have an idea. Mason gritted his teeth while carrying this hope. He dragged his injured body and moved a few steps backwards. The electric arc in Gryffindor's hands was revolving around. It was like a cat chasing a mouse, getting closer and closer. At this time, Mason had already exhausted all of his mana, and his body was totally covered in wounds. Just moving a finger would bring about pain that would rip him apart, not to mention defending against Gryffindor. If somebody else had been in this situation instead, they would have most likely just shut their eyes and waited for their turn to die. But Mason did not give up. He stubbornly dragged his injured leg towards the edge of the Aurora Square, bit by bit, while facing the oncoming Gryffindor. The bloody mess on his chest was oozing out blood constantly, leaving a trail of blood on the Aurora Square as Mason wavered with difficulty. It was because Mason knew that this was his last chance. If even this omnipotent roommate of his could not help him, then he could only shut his eyes and wait for death. "Mason, behind you. Just behind you." Lin Li was so anxious that he was about to cry while looking at this horrifying scene. He could only watch as his best friend was suffering, and could not do anything to help. For Lin Li, that sort feeling was like being nibbled by a venomous snake. The only thing he could do was to cup his mouth his hands and desperately shout Mason's name in hopes that Mason could hear what he was saying. But, the distance between them was tens of meters, and Mason was injured seriously at this time. His mouth, ears, nose, and eyes were bleeding profusely, and his brain was filled with a ringing sound, so how could he hear Lin Li's voice? He could only faintly hear his roommate shouting for his name, but as to what it was about, Mason could only hear it in a distorted way. "What behind?" Mason held in the tearing pain and forcibly turned his head over, but there was nothing on square except for some slabs of stone. At this point, Mason really felt like smashing his head and dying. "Master Felic, oh Master Felic. Of all things to joke about, you had to joke about my life. Is there a need to joke about it till this extent? How do you feel, Mage Mason?" Gryffindor was standing less than 10 meters, and an electric arc was still revolving around hand. That sizzling sound from the electrical jumps gave Mason goosebumps. Nothing. Nothing much. Mason wiped off the blood at the corner of his lips and squeezed out an awkward smile. At this point, he had already given up totally. Even that omnipotent teammate was of no help, and who else could save him? Although Mason was not somebody courageous, Gryffindor would definitely not let him go, since the situation had reached this stage. Instead of begging for mercy, why not take this chance to speak more while he was still able to talk? At the very least, he could vent his anger even if he were to die at the end, is it? When Gryffindor spoke, his face was still full of smiles, but in the next instant, his face was filled with brutality. "Then, how about trying this again?" A flicker of blinding electrical light flashed by soon after. There was a fizzing sound, and there was instantly a cloud of green smoke appearing. After that, there was an intense shriek ringing out across the square. Everyone in the Aurora Square could clearly hear it. Everyone's hearts could not help but clench tightly following the shriek. That feeling was like a frog had been pierced by a wire mesh and then shoved into cauldron to be cooked. After the intense pain came the endless numbness. There was a point where Mason had really thought he had died. There was no pain and no thoughts. His whole mind was blank other than the voice that was echoing behind him the whole time. It felt like nothing existed in this world anymore. Mason, it's behind you. It's behind you. The electrical light exploded on his body, and the latter had been burned crisp. The wounds on his body looked like squirrel fish, curling up one by one. The endless torture of pain had caused Mason's mental condition to be unsound long ago. His teammates' shouts entered his ear, and Mason instinctively raised his hand to painstakingly search around the stone slab behind him. To the right a little more, just a bit more, half of Lin Li's body had already reached into the Aurora Square. Both his eyes were fixed on Mason, who was searching painstakingly. At this time, his heart had clenched up. He was so anxious that it was as if he was the one competing. Behind. Behind, what is behind? What is this? Mason reached out his hand in a daze. He searched for a while, and finally touched something different. It was smooth and mellow. When he held it in his hands, it was even slightly warm. This sudden discovery was like a cardiac stimulant, and it immediately stimulated Mason's mind. It was as if even the wounds on his body no longer had the searing pain. It was as if he grabbed that thing in a hurry, and just by touching it, he could tell that it was a glass bottle. There is hope now. Once Mason saw that glass bottle, he knew that he would not die. That omnipotent friend of his was a genuine pharmacist. He had seen it with his own eyes at least twice. Once, he used a potion to save Oren, and the other time, he gave advice to Andoin on pharmaceutics. The potion he'd concocted would definitely allow Mason to get through this duel safely. At least he found it. Looking at Mason obtaining the potion, Lin Li finally gave off a huge sigh of relief. It was unknown who came up with the damned rules of this competition. It actually banned the usage of potions. From Lin Li's perspective, this was nonsense. It was unknown which idiot that was clueless about pharmacists thought about it and presumptuously came up with this rule. In the end, it almost killed Mason. How would this idiot know that a genuine pharmacist would have at least 10 different ways to hide the potions somewhere nobody could ever find them? There were more than 10 methods to consume the potion without being found out. This rule could only be applied to people like Mason, an unlucky person that did not master concealment methods but had a friend that was willing to give him a potion. It was also because of the limitation of this idiotic rule that Lin Li had no choice but to come up with this weird solution. Under the cover of the Ring of Endless Storm, he had hidden a potion in the cracks between the stone slabs in the Aurora Square earlier on. It could be used when Mason and Gryffindor were dueling each other. To be safe, Lin Li even used that potion bottle made from the Crystal of Eternity. This could reduce the risk of the bottle being destroyed. It was unlikely to be destroyed during the fight unless it was struck directly by magic. Otherwise, even an archmage-level magic would be hard-pressed to cause any structural damage to it. It was a pity that everything was too coincidental. When Mason was about to enter the square, Lin Li thought of telling him everything. Who knew that this guy would give a fervent and excited speech, which distracted Lin Li? Before he could even speak, this fella had hurriedly rushed in. In the end, he was almost roasted by Gryffindor's lightning before he could even surrender. But luckily, Mason found the bottle at the very least before Lin Li shouted till his throat was hoarse. As long as he drank this potion, Mason should be completely safe. Lin Li had hidden a genuine bottle of divine power potion in between the cracks of the rock earlier on. Half a Black Lotus's power was enough to protect Mason from all sorts of magical damage. Although the time was not long as it was just 10 seconds, for Mason, these 10 seconds would allow him to safely retire from the Aurora Square. This time, Mason was rather intelligent. He held the bottle of divine protection potion in his hands, but he did not drink it hurriedly, because the 2 judges were near him and Gryffindor was monitoring him. If he were to try to drink this potion now, Gryffindor would not allow him to do so even if the 2 judges did not care. He did not even have to waste any effort and would need to release just a single spell, then Mason would have to even swallow the bottle into his stomach. In order to lull Gryffindor's vigilance and to hide from the gaze of the judges, Mason had very carefully held the potion bottle in his hands. His eyes were fixed on Gryffindor, monitoring his every movement. All Mason had to wait for now was a chance to drink the potion. As to what would happen after drinking it, Mason did not think about it at all. Anyhow, Felix would never harm him. As long as he took out the potion, it would definitely help Mason escape from this predicament. During those 2 months at Alana, this idea had long been etched into Mason's mind. It had become a habit. Under all sorts of circumstances, his first choice would be to instinctively wait for this omnipotent teammate to make a decision. There was no other choice. Within these 2 months, the miracles Felix had created were too many. From the first trial mission to the survival of the Shadowglen, and then to today's finals in the Aurora Square. One after another, the miraculous performances even made Mason suspect that there was nothing this guy could not do other than giving birth to children. Seems like Mage Mason is in a lot of pain. Why not allow me to help you end this? Gryffindor's face was still full of smiles. His right hand extended out, and immediately 2 wind blades appeared, but Gryffindor was not in a hurry to release them. He slowly walked towards Mason while spinning the 2 wind blades in his palm at lightning speed. That sharp screech made all of the mages present have goosebumps all over. Haha, Mason forced out a smile and stared straight at Gryffindor. He waited till he was 5 meters away from him and exactly blocking out the sight of the judges behind. Mason then immediately opened the cork and shoved the whole bottle of divine protection potion into his mouth. Leave it for yourself, idiot. Just as Mason's voice had fell, the 2 wind blades in Gryffindor's hands shot out at the same time. In an instant, a screeching sound could be heard. At that moment, most of the spectators could not help but close their eyes. Even the lowest level mage apprentice knew that the air bomb and wind blade were the same in terms of innate character and theory. They both used wind attribute magic to channel it, but in reality, it dealt physical damage. This also meant that the 4 master-level mageweds that Aldwin had inscribed had no way of protecting the trial apprentice called Mason. With the release of these 2 wind blades based on Gryffindor's archmage powers, this trial apprentice called Mason would most likely be spilling blood. Then they heard a crisp sound. It was as if something had scratched glass. It was sharp and ear-piercing, giving everyone goosebumps. Immediately after, there were cries of alarm from the spectator seats. The group of mages that had closed their eyes started to slowly open them. After that, they saw that the trial apprentice called Mason had already escaped from the Aurora Square at an unknown time. He was now standing outside of the battling zone and directing a crude hand gesture at Gryffindor. *CK your mom, come over and kill me if you have the guts. Shut up, Macklin smacked Mason's head. There are so many people looking, don't be an embarrassment. Hurry up and go to the Guild Medical Center to treat your wounds. Oh. Although the old man's tone was hostile, the concern he had could not be concealed. As for Mason, he had pulled off a miraculously obedient attitude today. He did not glare furiously after being smacked by the old man on the head, but just obediently nodded his head. He hobbled back to the guild's medical center with the support of 2 mage apprentices. It was just that before he left, he waved his fist at Lin Li. Felix, destroy him. Relax. Lin Li gently nodded his head. This sentence was not only directed to Mason, it was also directed to himself. Gryffindor was really going overboard. Within a few days, he had injured both of Lin Li's teammates. Warren could only watch the tournament, and Mason had now been sent to the guild's medical center, not knowing when he'd fully recover. This was absolutely intolerable for Lin Li. Frankly speaking, Lin Li's character was nothing much. Even Herza could tell that this guy was naturally hypocritical. People like this hardly treated anyone as friend. Sometimes, he might seem to be a loyal friend, but actually it was just superficial. Very few people would be treated as true friends by him. For example, Mason, Oren, and that particular fatty at Gerosis. Lin Li would never be stingy towards them or reject them. He could not tolerate seeing them getting hurt. Gryffindor had consecutively injured Mason and Oren. It had completely ignited Lin Li's killing intent. Yet at this time, Gryffindor was regretting the opportunity that he had missed. His face was purple with rage while standing in the middle of the Aurora Square. Even when the judges announced his victory, he did not display a single hint of smile on his face. Gryffindor could not understand even after wrecking his brains. They were obviously two decisive wind blades. How could they miss for no rhyme or reason? Gryffindor clearly saw that those two razor-sharp wind blades had struck Mason's throat. Why was it that they seemed to have landed on a piece of metal and bounced far away with dang? They did not even leave a mark, not to mention slitting Mason's neck. How was this possible? Gryffindor stood there, totally clueless. But it was all right, for he still had another chance. That country bumpkin from Gerosis called Felix, wasn't he in the final 3 already? The finals for the top 3 was a round-robin tournament. Willing or not, I will still have to fight with the other 2. By that time, Gryffindor, will definitely let this country bumpkin from Gerosis know what it is to be a genuine archmage. Don't think that you are amazing just because you are acquainted with Hoffman. Even Hoffman himself would have to address my master respectfully as Leader Rosen, not to mention that you are only acquainted with Hoffman. What kind of a big deal are you, a trial apprentice from the countryside, going to be? When Gryffindor walked out of the Aurora Square with a sullen look, the tournament was about to come to an end. The final 3 were Gryffindor from Alana, Matthias from Sunrise City, and Felix from Gerosis City. The person who'd control the new Guild of Magic would be decided by the round-robin tournament at the end. To be fair, all 3 of them were given an hour to rest. After 1 hour, the first fight would commence. It would be Gryffindor from Alana versus Felix from Gerosis. Lin Li had been standing at the side of the Aurora Square and staring at the Gryffindor far away all the time. An hour of rest time went by quickly. After Aldwin said, "Let's begin," Lin Li and Gryffindor almost stood simultaneously and walked into the Aurora Square together. At this time, the atmosphere in the whole arena had changed. Be it the VIP seats, the spectators' seats, the big shots from the whole of the Felon Kingdom, or the mage apprentices that could only steal a few glances from the side of the square, they had all roused up their spirits and fixed their eyes on these 2 men that had just walked into the square. If the previous match was an appetizer, then the current one in progress would be the real main course. These 3 men represented the highest standard among all of the young mages in the Felon Kingdom. Be it Matthias, who had a sudden surge in power, the long-appointed number 1 genius, Gryffindor, or Felix, whose way of fighting was more interesting than a magic show, their strength had already been proven in this tournament. However, everyone wanted to know who was the strongest out of these 3 young mages. Herza, who sat at the VIP stand, asked in a mean manner, "Hoffman, you seem rather anxious." Of course, Hoffman's pea-like eyes stared straight at the Aurora Square. He was so anxious that he did not dare to blink. It was as if he was afraid that he might die just from blinking. After hearing Herza's mocking remark, he only pouted his lips and complained, "This match involves tens of millions of gold coins. If it was you, you would be as anxious as me." When this astronomical number of gold coins was brought up, Herza almost choked on his saliva. He stared at Hoffman with deep hatred and quietly cursed to himself. No wonder these bastards from the Glitter Gold Trade Union are so rich as if they are leaking oil. Fuck, a match like this, and they could even bet tens of millions of gold coins. How could they not be rich? After being shocked, Herza could not help but feel doubtful. "Hoffman, do you happen to know any inside story? If not, why are you so confident about Felix that you actually dared to bet tens of millions of gold coins? Don't be noisy, let me finish watching the match, and we'll talk." When those 2 men were mumbling to each other, the 2 trial apprentices had already completed their final preparations. Start. Once the judge's voice was heard, Lin Li and Gryffindor simultaneously started reciting incantations. Maybe it was because these 2 men's mentors were members of the Supreme Council, but both of their execution methods were abnormally similar. When the battle started, both of them used the highest level spell to pressure their opponents. Lin Li recited the Firestorm incantation, whereas Gryffindor recited the Ashen Tornado incantation. Both were level 14 fire attribute spells, and both also had a 5-second recitation time. Fuck, what is wrong with the youngsters these days? Why are they so brutal, making things so exciting from the start? Hoffman was dumbfounded as he watched. He had not imagined that these two fellas would actually choose to use high-level magic to fight from the start. Once these two spells were released, the only fear was that everything would be destroyed. Even if their elemental shields were not broken, they would definitely not able to stop the magical attack that came afterward. Didn't this mean that this battle would be over in just 10 seconds? Just as Hoffman was dumbfounded, the magical wave in the Aurora Square had been suddenly stifled. The searing fire magical elements seemed to be doused by a bucket of cold water and dissipated in an instant. It was as if it had been agreed on. Both of them started reciting incantations, and then suddenly cut off the mana output. With their strength as archmages, they had no need to worry about the issue of the bite of mana when cancelling a level 14 spell. The only thing that they had to be careful about was just the release and gathering of mana. As long as they were not too anxious or too quick, it would not result in any mistakes. After that, Gryffindor smiled. The power of this country bumpkin from Gerosis was weaker than his by quite a bit. To cancel a level 14 spell, Lin Li required 1 more second than Gryffindor. Usually, this did not amount to much, but now, it allowed Gryffindor to do a lot more things. After coming in first and cancelling the spell, Gryffindor did not hesitate, and released a mana retroaction. I want to see how long can an elemental shield help you. When the mental control had been released, Gryffindor already knew he had won because he clearly felt that his opponent's mana was instantly cut off. The thing he had to do next was to constantly barrage him with spells, breaking down his opponent's elemental shield like cracking open a turtle's shell. After that, he could do the same thing as he had with Mason, starting off with a mental control to deplete his mana and then using all sorts of spells to destroy him. On the other side, Lin Li did not lose his composure after being struck by a mana retroaction. He allowed Gryffindor's fireballs to strike the elemental shield, letting the layer of rainbow brilliance to dim slowly. Lin Li slowly raised the ether staff in his hands, and the dragon's eye socketed to the top of the staff started to radiate a gentle orange light. After that, Gryffindor was in a daze. How could that be? Under the flash of the faint yellow light, Gryffindor's smile froze on his face. He suddenly realized the mana in his body stopped flowing. No matter how he tried to stimulate his mental strength by recitation, he could not recall any bit of magical wave. Gryffindor nearly went crazy on the spot. *CK, how could someone who was suffering from mana retroaction be able to freeze him? Unfortunately, he did not have time to think much, because in the next moment, Lin Li already started reciting the Flaming Storm spell. Flames rose up into the air wildly. The streaks were like fire dragons pouncing towards him viciously. Gryffindor had no choice but look at how the Flaming Storm exploded on his body. The radiant elemental shield turned dim almost immediately. After the Flaming Storm, Lin Li showed no mercy and attacked Gryffindor with a chilling touch. The use of one fire element and one ice element magic was so complementary that they were like a rhythmic poem harmoniously written by both fire and ice. It blasted a magnificent elemental storm in the Aurora Square. Gryffindor could only back away from the raging magical waves. The retroactive effect brought over by the arcane wall turned the situation around. Gryffindor, who was 1 second away from absolute advantage, had become the one who had to deal with the beating. Gryffindor could not help but keep stepping backwards and make use of unexpected movements to increase the difficulty of casting spells for his opponent to buy more time for himself. *CK, how did he do that? There were thousands of mages in the audience. Their eyes were open wide after seeing how the young man named Felix had managed to turn the tides. Despite suffering from mana retroaction, he could still unleash the two spells with force as though nothing had happened to him. Could that be an inconceivable way of unleashing spells? No. It couldn't be. No matter how incomprehensible the technique was, it would never allow a person to oppose the laws of magic. However, the situation now was very unreasonable. What was the difference between a mage who could not control mana retroaction and a beast without humanity? God damn it, was another monster going to appear after these few hundred years? Of course, it did not concern the two men who were battling. Neither Lin Li nor Gryffindor had time to think of other matters. One was trying to defend himself from all the attacks and overcome the awkward situation, while another was trying to find every opportunity to attack so that he could continue to maximize the chances of winning. The battle in Aurora Square became strangely delicate all of a sudden. Lin Li unleashed another flaming storm as he saw Gryffindor backing away. Pom! A horrifying sound echoed in the arena like thunder. At that moment, at least half of the audience stood up. It was no laughing matter. Although he was an archmage, Gryffindor could barely defend himself from the two flaming storms and one chilling touch with his elemental shield. If his luck was worse, he might lose the entire battle. Sigh, Lin Li sighed softly while he waved his hand to put away a wind blade and prepare an elemental shield for himself. He knew that he did not have enough time left. Although he had compressed the time he used to cast the 3 spells, his speed was still lacking. When the second flaming storm was out, the arcane wall lost its effects. The seemingly terrifying splattering of sparks only bashed onto another elemental shield. After a soul-stirring exchange, the two men got back to the starting line again. Lin Li estimated it correctly. 3 icicles shot out from the blaze and thick smoke right after he held his elemental shield up. "You're doomed, bumpkin!" Gryffindor hollered as he walked out of the thick smoke. Gryffindor's rage was justifiable. He was back to his usual self now. His delicate long robe had long become a mess under the strong flames and thick smoke. It looked crumpled and torn as though Gryffindor had just walked out of a rubbish dump. He had bruise on his face and dirt on his nose. A circus clown would have been more attractive than him. How would the egoistic Gryffindor be able to tolerate such an insult? He really wanted to smash the Gerosis bumpkin like an ant. In fact, he had the confidence to do so. The heart-racing exchange looked as though it was Lin Li who gained the upper hand. However, Gryffindor was completely aware that it was just an accident. He just had not expected that Felix, who got attacked by the mana retroaction, could still turn the tides to control him. But it did not matter now. An accident was an accident because it would not occur frequently. One time was enough, he would not allow himself to be fooled again. Apart from it being an accident, the difference between the two men were obvious. Gryffindor was already an archmage who was at the peak of level 15. One more step, and he would surpass level 15 and reach level 16, a state where he could use the 4-element shields. On top of that, Gryffindor was completely aware that he could do it. Although it was unrealistic to most people, he knew that as the student of the legendary mage Rosen, he could do it anytime he wanted to. A rookie archmage who rose to his level due to good luck would never expect him to raise himself by a level just like that. This made Gryffindor anticipate how exciting Felix's expression would be when he unleashed his level 16 abilities. Would it be shock or hopelessness, torment or confusion? As he walked out of the thick smoke, Gryffindor started his recitation. "Damn," Lin Li exclaimed. He could tell that the spell Gryffindor was reciting was entirely made up of the High Elf's language. To a real mage, the language was like their second common language. In reality, there would always be some key characters written in that language in most spells. Since even Lin Li, a midlife career changer, had already comprehended some of the common words, how well would the top mage of Felon fare in the utilizing of the High Elf's language? However, it was Lin Li's first time hearing a spell that was formed entirely of the High Elf's language. This could only mean that its effects were far off from what an ordinary spell of level 15 would create. Lin Li reacted quickly. After realizing the gravity of the situation, he opened the Ring of Endless Storm and fished out a multicolored potion he had prepared long ago. Then, a strong wave of mana radiated in the entire Aurora Square. F***CK, Gryffindor has reached level 16. The crowd cheered. Almost all of the mages had their eyes open in disbelief. None of them had expected Gryffindor to reach the next level in the Archmage realm like that. **T, how could it be possible? Hoffman's eyes nearly fell off. He sprung up from his seat in shock. As he was too agitated, even his meaty cheeks twitched. He could not believe a mage around the age of 20 could have a level 16 ability. Only people who truly understood the differences between the magic levels would know that the one level that separated level 15 and level 16 was a huge leap. Although a level 15 archmage could master the levitating spell, he was not very different compared to a magic shooter at the peak of level 14. However, once he was able to reach level 16, the difference between the two levels would be widened as though there were no boundaries. That was because at level 16, he could learn the 4 signature spells, and use the 4-element shields across the series, a near-perfect defensive weapon acknowledged by mages. Doomed. Felix is going to lose. Even Hoffman, who always had great trust in Lin Li, had to bring out his hopeless side. The difference between a level 15 and level 16 was not what the technique of spell casting could breach. The only thing he could hope for was that Lin Li had enough potions on him to defend himself from a level 16 attack. But, to be honest, it was an extremely slight hope. Just when the crowd was stunned, Gryffindor's magic staff began to emit a blinding light. A massive amount of ice element filled the entire Aurora Square. Even the mages sitting far away from Gryffindor could feel the chilling sensation very clearly. At that moment, a cold white breeze blew at the Aurora Square, along with snowflakes as big as goose quills. 1,000 miles of ice. The audience gasped again. Of all the level 16 spells, the 1,000 miles of ice was definitely the most powerful. It had the ability to freeze everything instantaneously once it was unleashed. The scariest part was that before achieving the legendary realm, the 1,000 miles of ice was the spell that would result in the largest impact. It was no joke. In a battle that would concern a few thousand lives, 1,000 miles of ice could turn the tides for any losing party. Many skillful people from level 17 or level 18 could not help but feel intimidated by the spell. What was more for a young mage of the age 20? It's a hopeless case. Hoffman shut his eyes in resignation. Herza, who was beside him, also shook his head and sighed. What a waste of talent. Amidst the violent, roaring wind, one could only see white particles at the areas the chilling wind passed through. Immediately, huge shards of ice were formed. A wave of crisp sounds could be heard when the stone slabs on the ground of the Aurora Square froze. At that moment, it was as though the air was frozen too. Everyone was stunned. No one made a sound. The Aurora Square, that was unusually boisterous just before, became unusually silent now. Gryffindor gripped his staff tightly. Because he broke into level 16 by force, fatigue could be seen on his handsome face. However, apart from tiredness, it was filled with more satisfaction and elation. To him, it was extremely important to get rid of the mage from Gerosis. He would not hesitate to break into level 16 forcefully in order to achieve that. Since Matthias was also a cripple, it would be easy for Gryffindor to kill him even if he was in a weakened state. It wouldn't affect the next battle for him. Although the chilling air from the 1,000 miles of ice had dissipated, the furious snow continued. Amidst the mad winds, an ice sculpture stood in the middle of Aurora Square quietly. Mage Felix, how was it? I'm sure it doesn't feel good to be frozen in the ice, does it? Gryffindor jeered as he stood in front of the ice sculpture and laughed hysterically. He was beyond elation. He felt as if he had smacked dead an irritating fly that was buzzing around his ears for a long time. Although he knew that his opponent would not be able to hear him inside the ice, he could not help but stay there to soliloquize, venting all his emotions. What a pity. Although you have made it to the top 3, you are still unable to return to Gerosis alive. Yet, you can only blame yourself for this. It's not that I didn't give you any chance, but you took it for granted. PFFF, how clever do you think you are to even try to take away the presidential seat of the new guild from me? Go and have your grand dream in hell. Aldwin, quick, stop that little bastard. Macklin rushed up the VIP seats breathlessly. He urged, if anything were to happen to Felix, then, this time, the old man was really anxious. He was extremely clear what 1,000 miles of ice entailed. Even though Aldwin had established 4 master-level mageweths, and Felix was armed with an elemental shield, it was still the mightiest spell from level 16. If Felix was trapped in it for more than a minute, he would not be able to save himself even he become a divinity. If Felix were to die here, Macklin would be the first to be doomed. It was not easy to negotiate with Anduin. Who knew what that old man would do if he turned crazy, and the two other fellas in the pharmacists' guild. Macklin clearly remembered that Grim Burnside had sent a message to the Guild of Magic before the battle, and it said that President Balba had some matters to discuss with Mage Felix. Holy God, knew how long had Macklin not heard such a formal request from the pharmacists' guild. Macklin could use his knees to conclude that Lin Li must have established some connections with Balba when he was at the gathering. If the fellow were to get into any accident, what would the pharmacists' guild do to them? If the potions that they had been providing to the Guild of Magic for at least 1,000 years got stopped abruptly, not to say Macklin, the entire Guild of Magic would become sinners. Aldwin hesitated. To be honest, it was really difficult for him to make any decision. How would he not know Macklin's worries? But, both of them were in different positions. Macklin's concern was on the consequences if Felix were to die. He, however, had to judge the matter as a whole. Aldwin had to weigh the impact of his actions as the president. It would be very easy to stop Gryffindor. But, what would come next? Were they going to continue the battle? Strictly speaking, his interference in the last round already affected the overall fairness of the finals. He was thankful that Garrett for being abnormal just now. The extreme undead energy gave him the reason to interrupt the battle. But, what explanation could he give if he were to do so for this battle? Although Gryffindor was a little extreme in his tactics, he had never gone against the rules from the start. As much as he wished to stop him, he had to think about the fairness of the battle. Or else, how could the battles go on? Yet, Macklin was not wrong to be that frantic over it. Felix's background was really complicated. He was involved in too many things. If anything were to happen to him, it would be very difficult to explain to Jerosa's Guild of Magic. Just when Aldwin was still hesitating, Sendros and Hoffman stood up from the VIP seats almost at the same time. One took up his skeletal staff, started to recite a spell, and generated some thick black smoke in his palms. These two people had zero concern for the fairness of the battle. From their occupations and status, one being a necromancer and the head of the Darkness Shrine, the other being a conjurer of dark magic and the decision-maker of the Glittergold Trade Union, anybody would know that rules would not matter to them at all. They did not have to care about the Guild of Magic in their daily lives. To them, Gryffindor and fairness would never be as important as a talented pharmacist. Unfortunately, the situation changed again just when both of them stood up from the VIP seats. Sea-crack, amidst the roaring winds, was a crisp sound. Although it was gentle and soft, it was extremely deafening to Gryffindor. It was as though a thunder had sounded right above his head. Cracks could be seen appearing on the ice sculpture. These few lines were like plague, spreading uncontrollably. In the blink of an eye, they had multiplied furiously, like nobody's business. A crystal-clear ice sculpture looked as though it was covered in worms. Then, it exploded instantly. Pom! The shattered ice flew in all directions, forming vapor in the air. Gryffindor stared at the scene blankly. He saw how the cracks formed on the ice sculpture, and how it exploded thereafter. He was in disbelief. How could the Jerosa's mage escape from the 1,000 miles of ice? Did he see a ghost? The temperature of the 1,000 miles of ice was close to 0 degrees Celsius. It would be as tough as steel once it got frozen. How could a human mage be able to break free from it? At this point of time, it was as though Gryffindor saw a beast escape by prying open his own trap. So, Mage Gryffindor, you look very surprised? Lin Li asked. Although he was standing in the vapor and had many ice shards on his rune robe, the smile on his face had never been so bright. The temporal entrapment brought about by the 1,000 miles of ice nearly cost him his life, but it also allowed him to think through many things. Gryffindor's true ability was one of them. Frankly speaking, Lin Li had a shock when Gryffindor unleashed the 1,000 miles of ice. He knew very well what a level 16 archmage entailed. The appearance of the 4 signature magic spells had become the divider of the abilities of archmages. To be exact, although they were all archmages, a level 15 archmage had no chance to battle a level 16 archmage at all. It would be better to just surrender immediately. However, when the 1,000 miles of ice was unleashed, Lin Li started to suspect Gryffindor's true abilities. Gryffindor could have used the 4-element shields on him from the start. Even if he had mana retroaction and the arcane wall with him, it would not be any threat to Gryffindor. There was no choice too. The defense mechanism of the 4-element shields would be too mighty to counter any attack below level 16. If Gryffindor had that ability, why would he have toiled so hard to cope with Lin Li? When the crucial stage was over, everything that was abnormal became reasonable at once. That was right. Gryffindor must have used some method to level himself up unnaturally. Like Cromwell, who raised himself to level 14 using a mystical spell of the High Elves. Lin Li did not have to worry about anything. There was no free lunch in the world. Since Gryffindor broke into level 16 unnaturally, he would have to pay for it. Hence, when Lin Li walked out of the foggy mist, he was extremely lighthearted. How could this be? Gryffindor exclaimed as he fixed a deadly glare on Lin Li. It was as though someone had fixed his body in cast. He stood rooted to the ground for at least a minute before screaming in agony. Nothing is impossible, Mage Gryffindor. Since even roosters lay eggs, how can't I escape from the 1,000 miles of ice? You. Stop it. You can leave your words at the cemetery. Before Lin Li speak finish, he had already unleashed mana retroaction. Almost immediately, Gryffindor started his recitation too. But, before he could recite another word, the mana in his body got disrupted. He felt a strong heat flying towards him. It was a fireball as big as his face, dragging a tail of flame towards him. Boom! With a loud noise, a pyroblast flew and dropped onto the elemental shield. At that moment, it created a dazzling scene. Numerous sparks splattered like beautiful fireworks in the night sky, drawing a magnificent scene in the Aurora Square. Gryffindor was all shrieks behind all the grandiose. Flying off like a kite with broken strings, he puked a great amount of blood and left a long trail of it in the air. Instantaneous. Instantaneous pyroblast? Thousands of mages among the audience gasped. No one had expected that a competition between trial students would be so intense. Look at what they did. It started off with Gryffindor breaking into a level 16 when he used 1,000 miles of ice on the mage from Gerosis. At that point, everyone thought that Gryffindor won. After all, it was impossible to bridge the difference between level 15 and level 16. However, they realized that they had guessed it wrong very quickly. They saw how the young mage from Gerosis broke the 1,000 miles of ice apart with 0 injuries. Wait, that was not the end. The mages would never dream of how the monster would attack his opponent with an instantaneous pyroblast. All of a sudden, the Aurora Square was silent. Everyone was really flabbergasted after witnessing an instantaneous pyroblast. It was impossible, right? A pyroblast was definitely a level 15 spell. Although it was not as powerful as the 1,000 miles of ice, it required similar amount of mana as any level 16 spell. Although there were a lot of mages seated in the Aurora Square, none could claim they could unleash a pyroblast instantaneously. It was like forcing a rooster to lay eggs, and forcing a hen to crow. The Gerosis mage absolutely transgressed the fundamental laws of magic. Even if it were the mighty Sendros or Aldwin, they would not have been able to do that. But now, everyone had witnessed a young mage, not over the age of 20, unleash a pyroblast instantaneously. At that moment, all of them thought they were dreaming. It was absolutely unbelievable. Yet, the scene in the Aurora Square was very real. There was no tedious and long recitation of spell, and no complicated gestures, only a ball of flames followed by sparks, clashing gallantly against the colorful elemental shield. Their eyes were wide open together with those of the guests in the VIP seats. Too fake, Hoffman uttered in shock as though he was in a dream. That was simply unbelievable. If he'd viewed Lin Li as a talented pharmacist from the start, it was perhaps time to re-evaluate this young man. He had no choice. The scene he'd just witnessed was too freakish. Anybody with a normal IQ would do the same too. Hoffman could not help but doubt if the Glitter Gold Trade Union would be able to employ him even if he were to agree to it. Being a successful businessman, Hoffman would subconsciously use the perception of a businessman when he considered things. He always believed there was value in every individual, and people who were more powerful would have a higher value. But the young man before him was beyond powerful. The price to pay for him would no doubt be extremely high. Hoffman was not the only one reconsidering his plans of partnering with Lin Li. All the big shots, Herza beside him, Necromancer Sendros, Archbishop Los, as well as Prince Lionheart Jonathan, could not help but frown at what they saw. Even Aldwin and Macklin were deep in thoughts. They were going to re-evaluate the abilities and potential of this young man, and change their attitude accordingly. He was no longer a young man with a bright future. He was an unreasonably transcendent mage. Just when everyone were in deep thoughts, the battle in the Aurora Square had reached the most crucial point. Gryffindor knelt on the ground on one knee, his right hand clutching his staff. His complexion was really palish from the loss of too much blood. Yet, no sense of anxiety could be found on his face, but some traces of joy. He was probably the only one who knew that although he'd attained level 16 by unnatural means, the number of level 16 spells he could use was not limited to one, and the 1,000 Miles of Ice was only one of them. He was certain that the Gerosis bumpkin would never escape the fate of losing after he took a breather. "I will let you see what is a true archmage." Gryffindor smirked as he covered himself with water element. At that instant, everyone could see the formation of a blue panel. "Holy, that's a water shield." The mages who finally got over the fact that the pyroblast was cast instantaneously had another thing to gasp at. The sound of discussion filled the room as if billions of locusts flying past a field. No one expected that Gryffindor could still summon one of the four-element shields while suffering serious injuries. It seemed that the battle was not going to end yet. "I have to admit that I'm surprised at your abilities," Gryffindor hissed. His deadly glare was fixed on Lin Li like a poisonous snake. "But it is enough. Mage Felix, accidents are accidents, because they don't occur frequently." Almost immediately, Gryffindor's right hand gripped his staff. He began another round of recitation. It was really quick and had no pauses, just like a storm, and created vigorous magical waves. "Is that so?" Lin Li asked, the smile on his face not fading away. His ether staff was positioned in front of his chest. At that moment, he cast another fireball the size of a sink. Palm. The effects of pyroblast were too great. Even though he had the skills of a level 16 archmage temporarily, Gryffindor could not help but allocate a huge amount of mana to defend himself. He even had a short pause during his recitation. However, Gryffindor was not worried. He knew that it would take at least 5 pyroblasts to destroy the water shield in his hands. By that time, he would have finished his recitation and readjusted himself for the battle. Gryffindor would not expect it to be more than 5. He was very clear that the mage from Gerosis must have gotten the skill to cast instantaneous pyroblast by unnatural means like him. He did not know how that fella did it, but was certain that Lin Li would not last. 5 pyroblast had to be the maximum he could reach, or else how would he not have used it on him at the start but saved it to the very last moment? Furthermore, everyone knew that pyroblast would require a great deal of mana, and a level 16 archmage would only be able to cast around 10. Otherwise, pyroblast would have been the favorite spell among archmages. "Hey, Gerosis bumpkin. Feel free to be cocky. When you finish your mana, I will not allow you to cry," Gryffindor jeered, and diverted a great amount of mana to cushion the impact of the pyroblasts while continuing his recitation. Second, third, fourth, fifth. Gryffindor was right. After the 5th pyroblast, his opponent really stopped to take a break. He could not help but smirk upon seeing the scene he'd expected. Like Lin Li, he began a recitation that was more rapid. He wanted to use this crucial opportunity to show everyone who was the strongest amongst all the trial students. Then, the smirk on Gryffindor's face froze. He clearly heard that the opponent started his recitation as well. The voice was very fast, with a rhythm stronger than his. Furthermore, the spell he was casting was obviously pyroblast again. Goddamn. Gryffindor did not even have the time to be vulgar. He saw a fireball in the size of a sink dragging its long tail of flame towards him. Boom. Sparks could be seen flying, giving Gryffindor the urge to crash himself into the wall. Gryffindor really wanted to ask, "Fuck, do you know what is the meaning of wastage? That is a level 15 pyroblast, not something for a rookie archmage like you to cast as and when you feel like it." Unfortunately, before Gryffindor had the chance to speak, Lin Li cast another pyroblast on him. It was the same short and rapid recitation of spell, and it shut Gryffindor's mouth instantly. At this moment, Gryffindor really had the urge to blast a pyroblast back at him. But, he realized that it was not worth it to do that. Pyroblast would take up a great deal of his energy. He would be wasting precious energy if he was not totally sure that he could break his opponent's elemental shield. God damn it, I'm the top mage of Felon. I can't stoop to your level of a country bumpkin. I'm going to endure this. However, it became a prolonged one. Gryffindor had to allocate huge amount of mana to maintain the effects of the water shield. The attack of the pyroblasts on it was never-ending. He even took a minute to recite a thunder shock that only required 8 seconds of recitation in the usual situation. In that period of time, he had to withstand all the unruly pyroblast attacks. Every time a pyroblast landed on the water shield, Gryffindor could only convince himself that there was nothing bad about it. Felix would be doomed when he ran out of his mana. Hence, Gryffindor was very patient in waiting for Felix to use up his mana. However, Gryffindor realized quickly that the situation was not as easy as he had expected. The mana of the Gerosis bumpkin seemed to be unlimited. He had been using pyroblasts on him ever since he broke out from the ice. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes passed. In the whole of 3 minutes, he did not stop his recitation at all. There were roughly 20 attacks of pyroblast already. The audience were entirely hyped up. Almost everyone was shouting loudly. 18, 19, 20, keep it up, fella. One more, one more. The cheers were in tempo, just like a well-rehearsed cheerleading teams. The atmosphere in the entire Aurora Square was lit up by the 20 pyroblasts. Everybody was in a state of excitement and thrill. Before the battle started, none of them had expected to become the witnesses of such a historic exchange. Look at this mage who has not even reached the age of 20. Just his honorable achievement of blasting 20 pyroblasts is enough to put him in Anril's history annals. Everyone could foresee every mentor casually telling their own students about how a certain number of years ago a young mage named Felix cast over 20 pyroblast in the Aurora Square. None of the excited mages cared about Gryffindor's feelings. At the moment, Mage Felix was everything to them. He was the brightest star of the whole Aurora Square. The thousands of mages were in sync when they counted the number of pyroblast he cast, and saluted him with applause and cheers. Even Herza, who was supposed to have a neutral stance in the event, also stood up in anticipation. As for Hoffman, who was beside him, half of his body was leaning out of the VIP seats. He was cheering and clapping loudly for the young mage. Damn, are you still human? Gryffindor really felt like vomiting blood. Felix was too freakish. He did not draw a breath when he was attacking Gryffindor with the 20 pyroblasts. Felix continued to recite his spell and casually unleashed a fireball as big as a sink. The whole battle was like his own performance. He had never taken a break in his recitation of spells. The pyroblasts he unleashed turned Gryffindor into a clown who was desperately trying to ensure his water shield protected him. The attacks he occasionally unleashed were totally ineffective. It was as though he was scratching his itching feet through his boots. The only impact it created was some ripples on Lin Li's elemental shield. Gryffindor really could not understand how a normal human could be so freaky. The mana required to cast a pyroblast was equal to that necessary for 2 flaming storms. Many archmages above level 16 would never dare to choose such a method to blast the opponent's shield forcefully, what was more for a young mage who had not even reached level 16. He even secretly suspected that the fella had some equipment to recover his mana. Yet, even if it was equipment helping him to recover his mana, it would not have such an intense power. This was the continuous blasting of pyroblast. If he did not have a real theurgy, how could he recover so much mana? When the 20th pyroblast was out, Gryffindor really lost all of his hope. He could not believe how a normal trial battle would progress to this stage. What background did the Gyrosis bumpkin have? How could he be so freakish to survive the 1,000 miles of ice and cast 20 pyroblasts in one go, as though he was addicted? Holy, are you trying to joke with me? Gryffindor nearly went crazy. The blasts of pyroblast seemed to be never-ending. While Gryffindor was feeling the tiredness from holding on to his water shield, his opponent had no intention to stop at all. Not only that, for he also became more violent with his attacks. That was right, the speed of Gryffindor's opponent indeed became much faster. While the audience might not have realized, Gryffindor, being at the core of the flaming storm, felt it very clearly. The speed of the Gyrosis bumpkin casting his spells indeed became faster and faster. He'd still needed 7 seconds to cast a spell at the start. Yet, now he only used no more than 5 seconds to do so. The mere thought of Lin Li compressing the speed of casting a spell by 1/3 made Gryffindor want to crash himself into a tree. Did you get yourself addicted to attacking me? Fuck you. God damn it, are you still human? Being surrounded by fire, Gryffindor even had the urge to seek death. He laughed at how he'd treated Felix like Mason at the beginning, when he still used mental control to drain his mana. Now, Gryffindor knew he'd made a grave mistake. Damn. The way this bastard casts his pyroblast is as casual as how he has his meals. Will his mana ever be depleted? Thank goodness I didn't attack him like how I did to Mason. Or else, I would have shamed myself for life. That bastard would be still attacking him with pyroblasts while he drained his mana by casting the psychic storms. However, it was meaningless to say anything now. The only thing Gryffindor could do was to try his best to ensure his water shield didn't break. He made himself withstand the pyroblast amidst the dazzling fire sparks, and waited for his mana to drain to the very last bit. Indeed, the change of tide was filled with sarcasm. At the start, his intention was to drain the mana of that scoundrel. It was like how an ant wanted to f*ck an elephant, but in the end got f*k'd by that elephant. Felix was definitely a monster. The mana required to replenish a water shield was 1/10 that of a pyroblast. To use his level 15 pyroblast on a level 16 water shield, anyone would know it was a losing deal. Yet, the fellow was shameless enough to use pyroblast against him. Fuck, you are daring, eh? Gryffindor hissed as he glared at Lin Li breathlessly while he busied himself by replenishing his mana for his water shield. This time, his heart was set. Since his attacks had no impact on Felix, why wouldn't he bet on all of his mana? I just want to use my water shield against you, let's see how long you will last. After making this decision, Gryffindor's brain popped out a random thought: life was like a rape, since he couldn't prevent it, he should just stay silent and enjoy it. This fella is clever, Lin Li commented knowingly when he saw that Gryffindor stopped his recitation. He could not help but laugh at Gryffindor. Gryffindor's title as the top mage of Felon really suited him when he thought of such a solution. But, it didn't matter already. Although casting pyroblast required a huge amount of energy, it was not a problem for himself. Even if he was not in this battle, he could have blasted 100 of them. Now that he consumed the true multicolored potion from the guru level, he gave himself at least 10 seconds of resistance to magical attacks, as well as 10 seconds to cast level 15 spells instantaneously. The medical effects that were left would remain for 10 minutes. It would keep on triggering his mental strength and allow the recovery of his mana to speed up by 10 times. To normal mages, 10 times their speed of recovery of mana was nothing. However, how many mages could own the mental strength that even Anduin was envious of? Not to exaggerate, a recovery speed that was 10 times faster meant that they would have full mana at any point of time. In other words, in 10 minutes, he would not use up any amount of energy at all. what was pyroblast to him? If he had a higher ability, he would have used 100 dragon's breaths to kill him. Unfortunately, Mason's mental strength was not strong enough. Or else, if he had had the multicolored potion, which ensured that his mana would not deplete in 10 minutes, at the start, he would not have been bashed up so harshly by Gryffindor. "Oh, yes. I promised Mason to torture you to death," Lin Li hollered. His deadly glare was fixed on Gryffindor, and it was obvious that he sped up his recitation. A spell that was already compressed to 5 seconds of casting time became 4 seconds. At that moment, loud noise thundered throughout the whole Aurora Square. The heat produced felt as though the pyroblasts were lighting the air up with fire. The pyroblasts kept coming at Gryffindor. Lin Li was like a cannon. When one pyroblast just landed on Gryffindor, the next one was already lit with a red glow on his hand. 28, 29, 30. Another one, 60. As the crazy digit was out of their mouths, Gryffindor's water shield could not take the pressure anymore. It turned into white vapor amidst the dazzling flames. "Alright, Mage Gryffindor, don't worry. As you say, it is just the start," Lin Li jeered as he held onto his ether staff and slowly walked towards Gryffindor, who was lying on the ground. Gryffindor's complexion was extremely pale. The last pyroblast not only broke his water shield, but also created a serious impact on his body. His left arm was left hanging weakly before his chest, while his delicate robe had long been burnt to ashes. If not for his right hand that was still gripping tightly onto his staff, no one would be able to tell that the young man who was looking like a beggar was still the top mage of Felon a minute ago. Even Gryffindor could not help but admit that he was in an extremely messy situation. His left arm had been fractured by the pyroblast. Any bit of movement was enough to inflict excruciating pain. The skin on his chest suffered a very serious burn, and every breath he drew brought him agony. Other than these, he also had countless wounds of different sizes. Gryffindor was very clear of the impact of the pyroblast. If he did not have the water shield to absorb those attacks, as well as the protection from the 4 master-level mages established by Aldwin, he would have turned into ashes after being hit by the first pyroblast. And those were not the worst. To Gryffindor, the depletion of mana was the most terrible thing that could happen. In fact, he still could not believe how that fella could drain his mana with 60 pyroblasts. "What the H*LL, is that bastard still human?" Gryffindor was not the only one in disbelief. Everyone was shocked when Lin Li shattered the water shield with his pyroblasts. They were all discussing the 60 pyroblasts as well as the young archmage. Even the other people who knew Lin Li personally, like Macklin, couldn't help but rub their hands in anticipation. They had no choice, either. It was too freakish to cast 60 pyroblasts. If they had not witnessed it themselves, those like Macklin would have never believed such a bizarre situation. The amount of mana that 60 pyroblasts required to cast was astronomical. If it was an archmage-level spell, it would take 1 full day. The great amount of mana could only be described in one word: horrifying. Hoffman, on the other hand, was laughing heartily without reservation. "God damn it, why are you laughing?" Herza pursed his lips, and his face became more wrinkled. He knew why that fatso was laughing. If he were Hoffman, the deal that was worth millions of gold coins might make him more hysterical than Hoffman. That damn fatso was lucky. Although the round robin comprised of 2 rounds, a blind man would know that the ultimate victory would belong to the young mage from Gerosis. The young man was beyond crazy. Even if Matthias tried to hide his true abilities, would he be more powerful than such an abnormal human being? Look at what that phallic guy did. He did not even draw a breath when he cast those 60 pyroblasts. Just his terrifying mana was enough to set him apart from Matthias. Not to mention Matthias, even Herza, who was close to the legendary level, would not be able to it. 60 pyroblasts were indeed a little too much. "Ha ha ha ha. Old man, feel free to be jealous of me," Hoffman laughed as though there was nobody else with him. He had no time to care about Herza's feelings. Hee, Herza laughed. He was neither angry nor jealous of Hoffman at all. That was right, Hoffman really won millions of gold coins for himself. But, so what? While the Glitter Gold Trade Union gained more money for its already huge pool of funds, the Supreme Council gained a bona fide freakish power. At this time, Herza really wanted to remind the fatso beside him that the young man who had cast 60 pyroblasts was a member of the Gerosis Guild of Magic. In other words, he would become one of the members in the Supreme Council. Furthermore, after this battle, he would be in charge of a new guild. Until then, as long as the Supreme Council approved, he would be able to borrow the young man whenever he needed. How would that be measurable by millions of gold coins? Damn, why would the Glitter Gold Trade Union have such a foolish decision-maker, to still be elated after he let go of the valuable prize, just to grab at trifles? At this time, Lin Li already walked to Gryffindor. So sorry, Mage Gryffindor. I might have accidentally won, Lin Li apologized and smiled hypocritically. I'm warning you not to do anything funny. It is a serious crime to injure the guild steward. Gryffindor withstood the gripping pain on his body and moved backwards subconsciously. Although his words were threatening, his face wore a horrified expression. A moron would be able to tell that although he appeared menacing, he was actually in a weakened state. Oh, really? Lin Li reached out a right hand doubtfully. Before anyone heard him recite any spell, they saw the distortion of magical waves in their surroundings. Afterwards, a ball of fire lit up in his right hand. However, Lin Li was not in a rush to send the flaming hand to Gryffindor. He fiddled with it in his palms while giving Gryffindor a deadly glare. That's great, I am actually quite curious about the consequences of injuring our steward. When the flames rose, Gryffindor could feel his eyebrows twitch. His right hand that was against his chest trembled weakly. He could not expect what happened to Mason would be happening to himself so quickly. Take it easy, Mage Gryffindor. Don't be so anxious. You know, I don't like it when other people injure my friends, Lin Li said, and smiled warmly at Gryffindor before casting the flaming hand onto him the moment the word friends was pronounced. At that instant, a sizzling sound could be heard. What followed was a thick white smoke and a burnt smell. Aha! Gryffindor's shriek broke the silence in the Aurora Square. Instantly, he felt as though there was a soldering iron on his chest. The pain was so excruciating that he even had the desire to die. The two judges who hid themselves far away could not help but frown as they saw how Gryffindor struggled and screamed. It was a reenactment from the previous battle. There were the same sanguinary and menacing situation, just that the victim was not Mason, but Gryffindor. Sigh, Macklin sighed while he sat at his seat. The fella's temper did not change at all. Bearing grudges like no other people, this fella would find a way to make his enemies pay by returning the affront tenfold. But to think of it, it was Gryffindor's fault to offend the wrong person. He had already warned him against that. It was his own recklessness to make things difficult for Felix by abusing his authority as the guild steward. That bastard was definitely going to suffer in Felix's hands. However, since that scoundrel was the student of Rosen, he was afraid that old Anduin was going to get a headache for quite some time. Damn, how can such an affable man have such brutal methods? Hoffman gasped at the violent scene in shock. He'd always thought that the young pharmacist was a gentle person. It was no wonder that Hoffman would think that way. During the previous gathering, although Lin Li entered a conflict with two other people, it was only a minor matter. Neither Milo nor Ellen crossed his bottom line. Hence, it gave Hoffman the impression that he was an agreeable man. Affable man. Macklin nearly choked on his saliva when he heard those words. Damn, since when was he an affable man? From how Oren's minor injury triggered him to fracture the four limbs of the Marathon family's descendant, and how his attendant's injury nearly caused the death of Darian's nephew. To say that Felix was an affable man was too absurd. How is it, Mage Gryffindor? How do you feel now? Lin Li asked after he flicked his hand to remove the remains of the fire spark. What do you want to do? Gryffindor asked cautiously and backed away in fear. What do I want? Hee, Mage Gryffindor. Do you still need to ask me what I want? Lin Li said smilingly. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he kicked Gryffindor's chest forcefully. You injured two of my teammates and still have the cheek to ask me? Alright, let me tell you what I want now. Lin Li was a man who had the true abilities of a smithing guru. Not to mention that Gryffindor was gravely injured now. Even if he were at his normal state of health, Lin Li's attack's result would be serious. Everyone could hear Gryffindor's shriek and see how he curled up like a dried shrimp on the ground. Even the two judges from afar could not help but feel sorry for Gryffindor when they heard his whines. After that harsh kick, Lin Li was still not satisfied. When he gripped the staff again, Gryffindor immediately felt a vigorous distortion of the magical waves around him. What followed was a persistent creaking sound. Before he could react, Gryffindor saw a formation of thick vines. It was as though they had their own lives when they stretched towards him at an insane speed. Then, he felt tightness on his body. It came from those vines, which wrapped him up in the blink of an eye. Let me go. The sudden attack gave Gryffindor a great shock. He had heard of the legendary Bloodvine spell. Any living thing the Bloodvine entangled would have to fight until its last gasp. The Bloodvines would only stop after draining all the blood or amputating the affected body part of its victim. God damn it. How am I supposed to break free from this? Gryffindor already had the desire to die. It would be much better if his health was as good as before. But, now that he had been seriously injured, how was he going to save himself from those vines when he did not even have the strength to stand up? Furthermore, although the Bloodvine spell would not inflict physical injuries like air bomb, it was still a summoning spell. This meant that the Bloodvines that were summoned would have their own lives. Since Aldwin was only a master of inscription and had not become the invincible guru of inscription, the 4 master-level mageweavs were not useful in controlling the Bloodvine spell. This implied that if Gryffindor wanted to live on, he had to work for it himself. *CK this. Gryffindor had 100 doubts with regard to the young mage who came from a rural place. Where did he learn such a rare spell? Although Gryffindor was raised in Alana Guild of Magic and had Rosen as his mentor, he only heard of it before. Unfortunately, he did not have the time to think anymore. The thousands of blood vines were like poisonous snakes that tightly entangled Gryffindor. He looked like an ant stuck onto a spider's web. The blood vines became tighter as he struggled. Aha! Gryffindor cried out helplessly. He felt the needles of the vines sinking into his body. They were like greedy drinkers, sucking on his blood vessels. Every gush of blood that flowed out made the vines expand. In the end, the vines that were as thick as a pinky became as thick as a thumb. This time, Gryffindor felt really helpless. He gave up struggling. He let the blood vines suck his blood while his soulless eyes stared blankly at the sky. His face that was covered in dirt and bloodstains had no expression at all. At this moment, Gryffindor looked as if he was an innocent girl who had just gotten gang-raped by 10 hefty men. This, Macklin could not help but frown in his seat. Although Gryffindor was not well liked, it would be a messy situation if he was really killed by Felix. His mentor was the legendary mage Rosen, who was known for his petty and prideful attitude. If Gryffindor were to die in the Aurora Square, the Alana Guild of Magic would need to answer for it. This cannot continue. We need to stop them, Aldwin said nervously. He was very clear that both Felix and Gryffindor had abilities above those of an archmage. If they wanted to kill each other, the 4 master-level mageweavs were nothing to them. Should I go and stop them? Aldwin paused and thought for a while. Let me do it. All right. Macklin nodded. He did not say more. In reality, Aldwin was the only person who could intervene. That was because he knew Felix too well. Since it seemed that Felix had set his heart on killing Gryffindor, he wouldn't be dissuaded from it by any advice. If he were to intervene in their battle at this time, it was not certain that Lin Li would listen to him. Aldwin would be the best choice to stop Lin Li out of everyone in the VIP seats. Since he was the one who intercepted the previous battle to ensure the fella didn't get swallowed by the undead energy, Lin Li owed him a favor. Even if he was not happy with Gryffindor, he should give Aldwin face. God damn it, these bastards are really troublesome. Seeing that Aldwin was holding on to his magic staff, Macklin sighed in relief. Luckily, they had not created too great of a problem. "How do you feel, Mage Gryffindor?" Lin Li asked Gryffindor, sarcastically. Gryffindor was like a drowning man when he struggled under the blood vines. While Lin Li was at it, he observed the people in the VIP seats. Let me go," Gryffindor begged. This time, he did not care about his enmity with Orin, or his status as the top mage of Felon anymore. He only wanted to live on. At the age of 25, he did not want to become a dried corpse under the blood vines. He did not want to die in a trial battle. "Are you joking? I'll let you go, and you'll injure my teammates again? F***CKU, do you think my brain is also like yours, short-circuited? I beg you," Gryffindor's voice became weaker and weaker. While draining his blood, the blood vines were also drawing away his energy. If he could not escape the blood vines in 5 minutes, he was not going to live. Gryffindor had ditched his arrogance for that. He was even secretly determined to do anything to beg Felix to forgive him. You looked rather sincere," Lin Li said as he stroked his chin. While he was looking at Gryffindor, his mind was on the VIP seats. He had seen the commotion there. Aldwin was reciting a spell in a deep and serious voice. Lin Li was very clear what was on the mind of the president. He was just afraid of the trouble that would arise after Gryffindor's death. His background was too powerful. But, this was what Lin Li hoped to see. He'd never wanted to kill Gryffindor from the start. Since Gryffindor was Rosen's student, and Rosen was Anduin's fellow council member, if he were to kill him, Anduin would be in trouble. Because of that, Lin Li played a little trick on the elemental sequencing of those blood vines. Although they looked as if they were sucking Gryffindor's blood menacingly, it was just the appearance. While these thousands pricks on the vines were draining Gryffindor's blood, they were just a tough front to terrify others. When the vines were drawing out fresh blood, they were at the same time injecting the blood back into Gryffindor's body through the pricks. It was extreme fear that got the better of Gryffindor, which caused him not to realize it. However, while Lin Li did not want to kill Gryffindor, it did not mean that he would let other people intervene in his battle. The people who were injured by Gryffindor were my teammates. I should be the one who decide when I want to stop trampling on him. If you want to intervene like that, you'd better not regret. Alright, since Mage Gryffindor is so sincere, I shall try to. Lin Li glanced at Aldwin, who was still in the process of his recitation. I shall try to accept your apology. Really? Although Gryffindor was really weakened by the blood vines, he could not help feeling a little happy. Of course, Lin Li replied and smiled. He waved his hands and the blood vines started to loosen their grip on Gryffindor. Thank you, thank you. Gryffindor thanked Lin Li profusely. At this time, he had already ditched his pride as the top mage of Felon. He was scared that the 1,000 vines would grip onto him again if he were to be late in his apology. While Lin Li was controlling the blood vines, he was also observing the happenings at the VIP seats. Aldwin had completed his recitation, and there was suddenly a bright light that engulfed the whole Aurora Square. Instantly, both Gryffindor, who was entangled, and Lin Li, who was smiling, were swallowed by that light. Lin Li knew that that was the legendary level 20 purge spell. Any region covered by the spell would bring the living things that were summoned there back where they came from. Even if it was a devil which was summoned from the abyss, it would return to the dark abyss instantaneously. It was the same for the blood vines, which were low-level beings. And this was the moment Lin Li had been waiting for. Just when the purge spell lit up, Lin Li stopped controlling his bloodvine spell. You're welcome. The massive mental strength was activated to the max immediately. Just when Gryffindor tried to break free from the blood vines, a wave of mental strength that was filled with destructive elements gushed into his brain. Ah! The shriek also stunned Aldwin. Aurora Square was engulfed by the glow of the purge spell. Even someone with extremely good eyesight would not be able to see what was happening within the light. The thousands of mages could only try to guess the situation from the shrieks coming from the light. They wondered if it might have been that Aldwin's spell failed, and instead harmed Gryffindor. Macklin was dumbfounded as well. How did a battle that was fairly easy to nicely wrap up progress to such a state? The whole Aurora Square became silent. Everybody gaped at that blinding light. Until this moment, they never felt as if time was passing really slowly. No one knew how long it took for the light to be dispersed. Then, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from that light. The brilliance of the purge spell slowly dissipated, and the Aurora Square returned to its original silence. The freak that had released 60 pyroblasts in a row returned to the resting area in a flash of light. They did not even wait for the judges to announce the victor, because even a blind person could tell who had won this match. Gryffindor was lying motionless on the floor. His heartbeat and breathing were normal. He would occasionally let out painful moans and groans from his throat, but it gave people a feeling that he was dead. This sort of feeling was really weird. He was alive, yet it made people feel like he was a corpse. Yet, after thinking about it carefully, the mages in the spectator seats were suddenly enlightened. Indeed, this was all because of mental strength. Although Gryffindor was alive, he was no longer the number one genius of Felon. This was because his mental strength had been exhausted. It could even be said that it was completely destroyed. It took less than 20 seconds from when the light of the purge spell was ignited to the moment when it disappeared, yet Gryffindor's body underwent a drastic change. Not a single magical wave could be felt from his body. He was like a walking corpse lying down there. Macklin was somewhat confused. How did this happen? I shouldn't have taken action, Aldwin let off a sigh. Out of all those that were present, only he knew what had happened behind the brilliance of the purge spell. In fact, he already knew things were going bad during the moment when the purge spell was released, because he distinctly felt that an unparalleled mental strength had surged into Gryffindor's mind while borrowing the power of the purge spell. That aura close to being destructive would even make a powerhouse that had broken through the legendary realm like Aldwin feel shocked. It was too powerful and too overbearing. It was as if a thunderbolt had landed and completely destroyed Gryffindor's mental strength instantly. You did that? Macklin had a shock. No. Aldwin shook his head, somewhat annoyed. It's just that if I hadn't made any move, Gryffindor would not have become like this. Sigh, we really outsmarted ourselves this time, Macklin. The more Macklin heard, the more lost he was. In what way? I really don't know how to describe this trial apprentice of yours. He is terrifyingly smart. This match may seem to be full of accidents, but in reality, it was all within his calculations. Even my taking action at the crucial moment, using the purge spell to dispel the blood vines, had already been in his calculations. Do you know what he did to Gryffindor in the end? Mental disruption. Damn. He actually borrowed the power of the purge spell, separated a segment from the spell, and specifically separated out the incantations for a mental blast. With this segment of incantation that was separated, he totally shattered Gryffindor's mental strength. Macklin, were you able to do something so terrifying when you were 20 years old? And no. But there is something strange. Where did he learn this incantation from? I think it should be Anduin that taught him. Macklin swallowed his saliva. He seemed rather guilty. He clearly remembered that the incantation for mental disruption was a reward for Felix when this fella helped him forge an iron sword, but he did not imagine that 2 months later, this fella would use his own incantation and destroy the mental strength of the number one genius in Felon. F*CK, this thing cannot be revealed. If Rosen were to know about this, I will be in deep trouble. Macklin looked at the president cautiously and realized that the old man's expression was not any different than his own. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. This time, we really acted on our own imagined cleverness. If I knew this was gonna happen, Aldwin's voice carried a tinge of regret. Even though Gryffindor's conduct was not really good, he was still a powerhouse that had broken through to level 15 in his 20s. In Aldwin's position, he could not make decisions based on what he liked or disliked. He had to take into consideration the overall benefits of the Alana Guild of Magic. This isn't a big issue. Meanwhile, Macklin's train of thought was much simpler. Hence, he did not have to hide his hatred for Gryffindor. Who asked this **shoal to be so arrogant? It wasn't enough after injuring Oren, he even injured Mason. It's not like you don't understand Felic's character. This A*Shoal is lucky enough that Felic did not kill him with a pyroblast. Aldwin sighed again, and did not continue this conversation. He only called over 2 mage apprentices and told them to bring Gryffindor to the guild's medical center for treatment. Then, the victor of this match would be Felic from Gerosa's Guild of Magic. The 2 judges that had been scared out of their wits only regained their senses and announced the results of this match when Gryffindor had been carried off the square. Clap, 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 clap. A thunderous applause was heard in the Aurora Square. Thousands of mages stood up together and showed their respect to this young mage through their passionate applause. This splendid duel was worthy of them using their applause to show respect. At the start, who would have thought that this duel was going to be this exciting? The fight between these 2 trial apprentices had far surpassed the imagination of the audience. Be it the victorious Felic or the defeated Gryffindor, they had exceeded the expectations of the audience. Without a single bit of exaggeration, with just their strength alone, they would have long been a president of a guild each if it had been a smaller place. From the moment Gryffindor let loose 1,000 miles of ice, the audience already knew that this battle was going to be special. Sure enough, Felic used 5 instantaneous pyroblasts to counter immediately. This was closely followed by other 55 consecutive pyroblasts, pushing the battle towards its climax step by step. At that moment, everyone thought that they were dreaming. For them, this was more shocking than any legendary level spell. This battle could be said as perfect. Be it Gryffindor's 1,000 miles of ice or Felic's 60 pyroblasts, they were all filled with brilliance. It was simply perfect. Those that had witnessed this battle would not be able to find another mage battle that was as interesting. As for what happened at the end, it could only be said to be a small error. Some mages were even complaining that President Aldwin had made an unnecessary move. If it was not because of his sudden action, this battle might have been more interesting. It was all because of this untimely old man. Of all times, he had to take action at this point. Great, now that Gryffindor is crippled, let's see how you are going to explain to his mentor Rosen. Of course, all of this had nothing to do with Lin Li. After destroying Gryffindor's mental strength with a mental disruption, Lin Li slowly retreated to the resting area. He was taking a nap all the while. Even when the judges announced his victory, he did not even open his eyes to take another peek. After all, this was the first time he'd separated the incantation for mental disruption. Even with the assistance from the purge spell, Lin Li still needed some time to calm his madly distorted mental strength down. Macklin came over suddenly and stood in front of Lin Li with a face full of anger. He questioned, "Fox, why are you so ruthless?" Upon hearing that it was Macklin's voice, Lin Li could not help but laugh. "Doesn't this match what you want?" Ha, there was no choice, Gryffindor was really too arrogant. Even a person like Macklin had been annoyed with him for a long while. After listening to what Lin Li said, the old man immediately smiled shamelessly. It was just that he smiled for a bit before he suddenly remembered why he came over. He immediately changed his expression. "Fox, cut your bullsh*t. I told you before, Gryffindor's mentor is the legendary mage Rosen. That old man is not as kind as Aldwin. Fox, just watch, you are going to be in a lot of trouble." "What sort of trouble can it be?" "What trouble?" "Rosen, that old man, is famous for covering his faults. If he were to know that you turned his only disciple into an idiot, how do you think he is going to fix you?" "Felic." Just when both of them were speaking, Kevin suddenly squeezed his way through from the crowd. His expression was abnormally anxious, as if something serious was going to happen. What happened? Lin Li looked at Kevin and immediately figured that something was amiss. Kevin only shot a glance at Macklin. He did not say anything, but from his look, it was very obvious what he wanted. Macklin had always been sharper than monkeys. Just by looking at Kevin's expression, he immediately guessed what was happening. It had to be that something happened over at the Gerosa's Guild of Magic, and Kevin did not dare to say it front him. Hence, he gave off that sheepish look. Macklin immediately gave off a laughter. and reprimanded Lin Li a little more before he made an excuse hastily and sneaked away. After seeing Macklin off, Lin Li asked softly, "Speak, what exactly happened?" His expression was abnormally serious. He knew that Kevin would not come look for him for no reason. It was even more impossible for Kevin to be so mysterious that he even forgot about basic manners. "Just now, the Emerald Tower sent me some news. I think I have to tell you." "Speak." Lin Li's heart immediately tightened after he heard the words Emerald Tower. Currently, Jirian's mana had disappeared, and Shadow's Nest had become a threat. The news that had been received at this time would definitely not be good news. 3 days ago, Shadow's Nest attacked the Emerald Tower. What? Lin Li stood and stared straight at Kevin. "Is this news reliable?" Kevin nodded his head heavily. "Yes." "This? How is this possible?" Lin Li stood there in a daze. He could not digest this information for a while. Shadow's Nest attacking the Emerald Tower at this time could not be any worse than other news. Jirian's mana had disappeared, and Lin Li was far away at Alana. In the whole Emerald Tower, the strongest combat power was only a level 14 magic shooter. In the face of the newly equipped Shadow's Nest, being defeated was just a matter of time. "What's the situation like now?" "It's terrible." Kevin covered his face with both of his hands and slumped to the ground. His voice sounded like he was sleep-talking. More than 20 magic shooters and more than 50 mages were killed. Almost everything has been plundered by them. At the end, they even set the Emerald Tower on fire. Fuck, Lin Li almost blacked out on the spot. More than 20 magic shooters and more than 50 mages. This was almost the entire magic strength of the Emerald Tower. The Emerald Tower would require at least 10 years before it could recover from this loss. Lin Li clenched his fist tightly, and his eyes were almost spewing out fire. What about Jirian? The good news out of this misfortune was that Uncle Jirian had been secretly sent away before the Emerald Tower was attacked. That's good. After listening to the only piece of good news, Lin Li finally let out a sigh of relief. As long as Jirian was still alive, there would be hope for the Emerald Tower. What were the reactions from the other forces? The Merlin family swung towards the Shadow's Nest. Other than Isra, Reuben, and Old Odin, the other forces are still observing. Honestly, this time we really have to thank the 3 of them. If it was not because of their assistance, Uncle Jirian might not have escaped from the Emerald Tower. Okay. Lin Li nodded and his complexion started to become gentler. As long as Jirian was safe and the other families did not interfere, the Emerald Tower still had a chance to recover. It was just that Lin Li had to return as soon as possible. If he were to be late, he might even lose the 3 most unwavering allies. After all, there was no such thing as everlasting alliances in this world. There were only everlasting benefits. The reason why these 3 forces protected Jirian was only because they knew all along that the Shadow's Nest would not be able to give them any substantial benefits. If anything were to change and cause them to lose faith in the Emerald Tower, Lin Li believed that they would absolutely sell out Jirian without any hesitation. Fuck, what is Shadow's Nest thinking? They actually attacked the Emerald Tower at this time. Are they trying to interfere with the forces of Gerosis? Shadow's Nest isn't that stupid, right? This would definitely anger everyone. No, their aim seems to be searching for something. On the second day after they attacked Emerald Tower, they retreated back to the Demon Fall Valley. I get it now, Lin Li nodded. He did not continue speaking. This time, he really understood. As expected, it was similar to what he had guessed. Shadow's Nest capturing the Demon Fall Valley had to be due to the hidden support they received from the Marathon family. Lin Li could even imagine that both parties had reached some sort of agreement. After being successful, the Marathon family would obtain something from the Demon Fall Valley, whereas Shadow's Nest would obtain the resources from the Demon Fall Valley. It was just that when the Marathon family was looking for that thing, they did not have many clues. Hence, they thought of attacking the Emerald Tower and looking for leads from the documents of the guild. Fuck, you've guts, Marathon family. Lin Li was gritting his teeth while speaking. Felix, do we have to return immediately? I am afraid that Uncle Jirian. No, I still have a score to settle. Lin Li shook his head, and his pair of reddened eyes stared straight at Matthias. His voice was soft and low, it was as if he was trying to explain to Kevin, but also felt like he was talking to himself. It's time to settle the score. What score? Kevin was baffled. Nothing much, Lin Li forced out a smile. Kevin, go prepare the carriage now, and then go to the Silver Hands base to look for a woman called Serena. Tell her that I want to hire some people from the Silver Hand. It's best if they are strong fighters. Oh, yes, bring Ina along as well. I promised her that I will bring her back to Gerosis. Okay. Oh, yes, after Lin Li reached this point, he suddenly remembered something. When you leave, don't forget to go to my house and bring Sean. We have to return to Gerosis by tomorrow evening. No problem. Kevin nodded his head. He did not question further, and turned around to squeeze through the crowd. After seeing Kevin off, the 1 hour's rest time was almost up. Lin Li moved his limbs around and slowly entered the Aurora Square without even waiting for the judge to call his name. The contestants for the next match are Matthias from the Sunrise City Guild of Magic and, from the Gerosis Guild of Magic, Felix. Felix. When the judge's voice had just landed, there was tsunami-like applause in the Aurora Square. Thousands of people were cheering, causing the whole square to tremble. Almost every mage stood up and showed their respects to this monstrous young mage, through their own unique ways. Earlier, those 60 pyroblasts had completely won over this nitpicking crowd. No matter their status or position, they had all completely become fans of this young mage from Gerosis at this point. The standpoint of these thousands of mages had never been so unanimous before. Everyone believed that only this monstrous mage from Gerosis was worth of winning this finals. Honestly, there's no need to continue with this match, Hoffman was no exception. He pouted his lips without any manners at all. He impolitely glanced at Matthias, who was slowly walking up to the square. Based on the strength that Felix displayed just now, there is not a single mage in the whole Felon Kingdom that is under 30 years old that can challenge him. That Matthias should just forget about it. It's better for him to surrender earlier, to save himself from the embarrassment later. No, no, no. Herza, who was sitting beside him, shook his head. His pale face carried a thoughtful expression. If I am not mistaken, this match will be more exciting than the previous one. PFF. Hoffman could not believe it at all. Yet, Herza was full of confidence. My judgment will not be wrong for this match. PFF, didn't you say that as well for the first match? Something like, the battle mage is unrivaled. Unrivaled my *guess, wasn't he sent packing by Felix in a short while? Furthermore, when Gryffindor went up the square, didn't you also say that Gryffindor was terrifyingly strong and that Felix was going to be in trouble, and then what happened? 60 pyroblasts, he got blasted till his mother could not even recognize him anymore. Haha, Herza laughed, and did not bother explaining himself, but his eyes were fixed on Matthias. He believed that he would definitely not be mistaken this time round, because the magical wave emitting from Matthias' body was all too familiar. That magical wave was similar to a vortex and constantly swallowing everything, and was very similar to that of Ashen Warlock Roland. After thinking about the relationship between the Marathon family and the Ashen Warlock, no matter how stupid Herza was, he should have guessed it. Why was Matthias able to have such a tremendous power within a short period of 1 month, and why was he able to have such a unique magical wave? Without a doubt, Matthias must have been taught by the Ashen Warlock, by some chance. It was still difficult to tell who'd be the victor of this match. After 2 months, the two of them were standing face to face again. It was just that the current Matthias was not longer the newbie that could be trampled over at will. Even Lin Li had no choice but to be serious about this match. Ever since Matthias walked into the Aurora Square, Lin Li could already feel that the magical wave emitted by the opponent was incomparably weird. It was like a vortex, constantly swallowing its surroundings. Even the afternoon sun's rays were slightly distorted when they shone on Matthias' body. Relax, I won't kill you, when brushing past Lin Li's shoulder, Matthias' eyes suddenly displayed a deeply etched hatred. He whispered, "I will only break your limbs, destroy your mental strength, and make you useless forever to suffer in the deepest depths of hell." "Oh, is that so?" Lin Li rubbed his nose, and stared at Matthias for a while with a smile before saying, "Then it's such a shame, I think I will most likely kill you." "Wait and see." Matthias glared at the opponent and shut his mouth. He knew that if he were to argue, even 10 of him would not be able to overthrow this mage from Gerosis. But how was that important? The battle between of mages had always been about strength. So what if he could shoot out 60 pyroblasts? How could that trash, Gryffindor, compare to me in strength? Before the match began, the atmosphere in the Aurora Square started to get intense. Probably only Lin Li knew that the words he'd spoken just now were not to scare Matthias. He had already decided that he would kill Matthias in this match. The reason was simple. The actions of the Marathon family had already far surpassed Lin Li's bottom line. Forget about them attacking the Demon Fall Valley, they killed so many people and even burned down the Emerald Tower. For Lin Li, the Emerald Tower was like his second home. He could tolerate anything, but he absolutely could not tolerate that they burned down his second home. It's time to settle the score. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.